What if everything you believed about yourself was built on a lie someone else decided you should never know? This is the story of Claire Hayes Walsh and Sophie Mitchell. Two women bound by 6 years of love and one photograph that threatened to tear everything apart. It fell from an old book in Claire's Park Slope apartment, a faded image of a stranger holding her as an infant. On the back, a date that made no sense, a name she had never heard, and suddenly, the woman she called mother became a mystery. The trail led Claire to Taos, New Mexico, to a dusty adobe house where Miranda Hayes had been waiting for 30 years, waiting to tell her the truth about Eleanor, about a love that had to be hidden, about a choice that was made before Claire could even speak. But someone didn't want that truth to surface. Someone with money, with power, and with everything to gain if Claire's identity could be erased. This is not just a story about where we come from. It's a story about who gets to decide who we are, and what happens when a woman refuses to let anyone else write her story. Stay with me until the end to discover this story. See you soon. The photograph slipped from the book as if it had been waiting 30 years to be discovered. Claire held it between her fingers, and something inside her shattered before she could name what it was. In the image, an unknown woman cradled her as a baby, a woman who wasn't her mother, a date written on the back that didn't match anything she'd been told, and a look in those unfamiliar eyes that seemed to beg forgiveness from across the span of time. The brownstone apartment in Park Slope smelled of old books and freshly brewed coffee. Sophie had left early that morning, leaving a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Back before lunch. Love you." 3 simple words that, until 5 minutes ago, meant safety. Now Claire wasn't sure what anything meant anymore. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, from something far worse. 34 years believing one story. 34 years building an identity on foundations that now cracked beneath her feet. All because of a cardboard box inherited from an aunt she barely knew. Subscribe now. YouTube prioritizes subscribers, and those who aren't subscribed miss future stories. Claire sank into the emerald velvet armchair that Sophie had rescued from the Brooklyn flea market. The mid-morning sun streamed through the bay window and cast rectangles of light across the hardwood floor. Everything looked normal. Everything seemed in its place, except her. She turned the photograph over once more. The date read, March 12th, 1991. But according to her birth certificate, according to the documents her adoptive mother had shown her countless times, she had been adopted in August of that year. 5 months later. Where had she been during those 5 months? With whom? And why had no one ever told her? The woman in the photo had dark hair pulled back in a long braid. She wore a flowing dress with Native American patterns, the kind you'd see in the shops of the Southwest. Her eyes gazed directly at the camera with a mixture of tenderness and something else. Something Claire couldn't decipher. Fear? Guilt? Farewell? The phone rang and she jumped. It was Sophie. "Everything okay?" Sophie asked from the other end of the line, her voice calm as always. "You're breathing weird." Claire wanted to lie. She wanted to say yes. Everything was fine. She was just going through Aunt Maggie's things. But her throat closed up. "I found something," she finally murmured. "Something bad?" "I don't know. I don't know what it is." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming home," she said, and hung up without waiting for a response. That was Sophie. Few words, many actions. In the 6 years they'd been together, Claire had learned to read her silences like others read books, and that silence just now said, "Whatever it is, I'll be there with you." While she waited, Claire went through the rest of the box. Yellowed letters that smelled of dampness and time. receipts from hospitals that no longer existed, a rosary with black beads, and at the bottom, a manila envelope with her name written in faded blue ink. For Claire, when the time comes. The time. What time? Who decided when the time was? Aunt Maggie had died 3 weeks ago, alone in her Greenwich Village apartment, surrounded by cats and secrets. Claire had only visited her a handful of times in her life. Her adoptive mother always found excuses not to go. Margaret is complicated, she would say. She has strange ideas. Now those words sounded different. They sounded like a warning. Claire opened the envelope with clumsy fingers. Inside was a letter, and another photograph. In the second image, 2 women appeared. One was clearly the same woman from the first photo, with her braid and her patterned dress. The other was Eleanor, her adoptive mother, but younger, much younger. And they were holding hands in front of what looked like an adobe church. On the back, another date, July 1990, a year before her adoption. A year before, supposedly, Eleanor and Claire's biological family had even met. The letter was written in cramped, nervous handwriting. Dear Claire, if you're reading this, it's because I'm gone, and because the secret has weighed too heavily for too long. Your mother isn't who you think, and I'm not who they told you. There's a story you deserve to know, even if it hurts. Even if it destroys everything you thought you knew. Find Miranda Hayes in Taos, New Mexico. She has the answers Eleanor never gave you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Your aunt who loved you in silence, Maggie. The apartment door opened, and Sophie walked in, her auburn hair windswept from the November chill. She carried a paper bag of pastries from the cafe on 7th Avenue, like every morning. As if this were a normal day. As if the world hadn't just split in two. Let me see, Sophie said, approaching without taking off her jacket. Claire handed her the photos and the letter without a word. She watched how Sophie studied them, how her eyebrows furrowed slightly, how her lips pressed together. Sophie had a way of processing information that Claire had always admired, methodical, without panic, seeking facts before emotions. This woman, Sophie pointed to the first photo. Do you know her? I've never seen her before. And this date? It doesn't match anything. According to my papers, I came to live with Eleanor in August of '91. This photo is from March. Sophie nodded slowly. And Taos? I've never been there. I didn't even know I had any connection to New Mexico. Sophie set the photos on the coffee table and took Claire's hands in hers. They were cold. They were always cold, as if Sophie saved all her warmth for moments like this. What do you want to do? Sophie asked softly. I don't know. Yes, you do. You're just afraid to say it. Claire looked into her eyes. Those honey-colored eyes that had saved her so many times from her own abysses. Those eyes that never judged her, that never asked her to be someone she wasn't. I want to know the truth, Claire finally admitted. Even if it destroys me. Sophie nodded. Then we'll find it together. They spent the rest of the morning going through every document in the box. Claire called work to say she wouldn't be coming in. As a lawyer at a firm in Tribeca, she had some flexibility, but she knew she'd have to give explanations eventually. For now, that didn't matter. Among the papers, they found more clues. A birth certificate that wasn't the one Claire knew. On this one, her name appeared as Claire Hayes Mitchell, not Claire Walsh Mitchell, as she'd always believed. The place of birth read Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the mother listed was Miranda Hayes. Oh my God, Claire whispered. Sophie leaned over to read over her shoulder. Hayes, like the woman the letter mentions. It's her. Miranda. Hayes is my biological mother. The word mother felt strange in her mouth, as if she were talking about someone else, about a stranger, because that was exactly what Miranda Hayes meant to her, a complete stranger. But then, Sophie frowned. Why the adoption? Why Eleanor? I don't know. The letter says to find Miranda, that she has the answers. Do you think she's still alive? Claire fell silent. She hadn't thought about that. The photo was from over 30 years ago. Miranda could be anywhere, or nowhere. I have to find out, Claire said. Sophie pulled out her phone and began searching. After several minutes, she found something. There's a Miranda Hayes listed in Taos, New Mexico. She owns a native crafts and textile shop near the plaza. How do you know it's her? I don't know for sure, but it's a starting point. Claire looked out the window. The Brooklyn sky had turned gray, as if the weather wanted to match her mood. On the street, an elderly couple walked hand in hand. A vendor pushed his food cart with its familiar rattle. Life went on, oblivious to the storm brewing inside that apartment. Sophie, Claire said without turning. What if I discover something I can't handle? Sophie came up behind her and wrapped her arms around her, resting her chin on her shoulder. Then we'll handle it together, like always. Claire closed her eyes and allowed herself for a moment to feel held. But even in that embrace, a question gnawed at her. Who was she really? And why had her adoptive mother lied to her all her life? That night they couldn't sleep. They stayed up until dawn, Sophie's laptop open with dozens of tabs. They searched records, old news articles, anything that might connect Miranda Hayes to Eleanor Walsh. What they found was puzzling. There was no official connection, no document linking them. It was as if the photo where they appeared together shouldn't exist. It's like someone erased everything, Sophie murmured, rubbing her eyes. Or like there was never anything to erase. At 3 a.m, Claire made a decision. I'm going to Taos. Sophie looked at her. When? This weekend. I can't keep waiting. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. You have the gallery show. Claire, Sophie interrupted firmly. The show can wait. You can't. They looked at each other in the dim light of the room. The glow from the screen illuminated their faces, casting shadows that seemed to reflect the complexity of what they were facing. Thank you, Claire said. Sophie smiled slightly. Don't thank me yet. We still don't know what we're going to find. Friday arrived faster than expected. Claire had spent the previous days in a kind of trance, fulfilling her obligations at the firm but not really being present. Her colleagues noticed something different about her, but no one asked. In New York, people had learned to respect each other's silences. Sophie, for her part, had reorganized her schedule for the trip. She canceled 2 photo sessions and postponed a meeting with a curator. When Claire asked if she was sure, Sophie just replied, "There are things more important than photos." The flight to Albuquerque left at 7 a.m. From there, they would rent a car and drive to Taos. About 2.5 hours through the high desert of New Mexico. Claire had read about the route, about the dramatic landscapes of sage and mountains, about the Pueblo communities that dotted the way. But none of that really interested her. She just thought about arriving, about finding Miranda Hayes, about getting answers. At JFK, while they waited to board, Sophie bought 2 coffees and a couple of scones from the terminal bakery. "You need to eat something," she said, handing over the pastry. "I'm not hungry." "I know, but your body is." Claire took the scone reluctantly. She bit into it, and the buttery flavor was strangely comforting. like a small anchor to normalcy in the midst of chaos. "You know what hurts the most?" Claire said after a moment. "What?" "That Eleanor looked me in the eyes every day of my life and never said anything, not a hint, not a sign. She let me believe a lie as if it were the most absolute truth." Sophie was quiet. "What if she had her reasons?" she finally asked. "What reason could justify that?" "I don't know. But people do complicated things for love. Sometimes wrong things." Claire looked at her with a mixture of frustration and gratitude. "Do you always have to be so reasonable?" Sophie smiled. "Someone has to be." They boarded the plane and sat together in an aisle row. Claire by the window, Sophie in the middle seat. The plane took off over New York City, leaving behind the skyline and the endless sprawl. Claire watched how the city grew small, how the streets became lines and Central Park became a green rectangle. Her whole life was down there. Her job, her friends, the apartment she and Sophie had decorated over months. And yet, in that moment, it all felt fragile, built on sand. The flight lasted about 4 hours. When they landed in Albuquerque, the dry mountain air hit them like a gentle slap. New Mexico was another world, another climate, another rhythm. They rented a car and headed north on the highway toward Taos. The drive was exactly as Claire had imagined. Vast high desert, dramatic mesas, and a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Sophie dozed for a while, her head leaning against Claire's shoulder. But Claire couldn't close her eyes. She watched through the window, wondering what awaited her at the end of the road. Taos welcomed them with a sky streaked with clouds and a chill that cut to the bone. The adobe buildings lined the narrow streets like something from another century, with their rounded edges and earth-tone walls. Galleries and craft shops advertised turquoise jewelry and Navajo rugs. It was a beautiful town, but Claire wasn't there to sightsee. They checked into a small inn near the plaza, one with thick adobe walls and a courtyard full of desert plants. The owner, an older woman with silver hair and a bun, gave them a room on the second floor overlooking the mountains. "Here for vacation?" the woman asked as she handed over the key. "Something like that," Sophie replied. The woman looked at them curiously, but didn't press. In tourist towns like this, people had learned that visitors brought their own stories, and didn't always want to share them. Once they were settled, Claire pulled out her phone and searched for the address of the crafts shop. It was only a 10-minute walk from the plaza. "Do you want to go now?" Sophie asked. Claire hesitated. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky orange and purple over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. "Tomorrow," she decided. "I need to prepare myself." Sophie nodded and came over to hug her. "I'm proud of you," she whispered in her ear. "For what?" "Because you're here. Because you didn't hide. Because you chose the truth even though it hurts." Claire felt her eyes filling with tears, but she held them back. It wasn't time to cry yet. First she had to know. Then she would figure out what to do with everything she felt. That night they had dinner at a small restaurant near the inn. Green chile stew, a specialty of the region, accompanied by fresh tortillas. The place was almost empty. Just a couple of tourists in one corner, and an older man reading a newspaper at the counter. "What are you going to say to her?" Sophie asked while stirring her coffee. "To Miranda, I mean." Claire thought about it. "I don't know. I guess I'll ask her who I am, who she is, why she gave me up, why she never looked for me. What if she doesn't want to talk? Then I'll insist until she does." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You sound like the lawyer you are." "Maybe, but I'm also the girl who grew up without knowing the truth. And that girl deserves answers." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the soft music playing from an old radio behind the counter. "There's something I haven't told you," Sophie murmured after a while. Claire looked at her. "What?" "When I saw the photos, when I read the letter, I felt scared." "Scared of what?" Sophie lowered her gaze. "That this would change you, that what you discover would push you away from me." Claire reached across the table and took Sophie's hand. "Listen to me carefully," she said firmly. "Nothing I discover is going to change how I feel about you. Nothing. You're the only real thing I have right now. The only thing I know for certain is true." Sophie looked at her with shining eyes. "Do you promise?" "I promise." They stayed like that, hands intertwined on the table, while outside the Taos night filled with stars, and the cold seeped through the cracks in the windows. The next day, Claire woke before dawn. She hadn't slept well, her mind spinning endlessly, imagining possible scenarios for the meeting with Miranda. She got up quietly and looked out the window. The street was deserted, only a stray dog sniffing around in the shadows. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, announcing a day that would change everything. Sophie woke shortly after and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed. "Ready?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. "No, but let's go anyway." They had a quick breakfast at the inn: toast, scrambled eggs, orange juice. The owner recommended a shortcut to the plaza where Miranda's shop was supposedly located. They walked through the narrow streets in silence. Sophie took Claire's hand, a gesture that had become her way of saying, "I'm here," without words. The shop was in a small adobe building near the plaza. The sign read, "Hayes Traditions, Southwest Textiles and Crafts." In the window display, there were woven blankets, embroidered blouses, silver and turquoise belts, all handmade, all with the vibrant colors of the Southwest. Claire stopped in front of the door. Her heart was beating so hard, she was afraid it could be heard from outside. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Sophie asked. "Yes, please." They went in together. The interior of the shop was small but welcoming. The walls were covered with hanging textiles, creating a tapestry of colors and patterns. In the back, behind a wooden counter, sat a woman in her 60s. She had gray hair pulled back in a braid, brown skin weathered by the sun, and dark eyes that watched with a mixture of kindness and caution. It was her, the woman from the photos. Older, more tired, but unmistakably her. "Good morning," the woman said. "Looking for something special?" Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She felt her legs trembling. Sophie squeezed her hand, giving her strength. "We're looking for Miranda Hayes," Sophie said for her. The woman studied them more closely. "I'm Miranda Hayes. Who are you?" Claire stepped forward. She pulled the old photograph from her bag, the one that had fallen from the book, and placed it on the counter. "My name is Claire," she said, her voice shaking, "and I believe you're my mother." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Miranda looked at the photograph as if it were a ghost. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Her eyes filled with something that could have been pain, or guilt, or both. Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "From a box my Aunt Maggie left me, along with a letter telling me to find you." Miranda closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, tears were streaming down her cheeks. "Margaret," she murmured. "I always knew that someday, but I didn't think..." She stopped and looked at Claire with an intensity that made her take a step back. "What's your name?" Miranda asked. "Your full name." "Claire Walsh Mitchell." but I found another birth certificate that says Claire Hayes Mitchell. Miranda nodded slowly, as if each word confirmed something she already knew. Hayes? Mitchell is your real name, she said. The one I gave you when you were born. Before everything. Sophie moved closer to Claire, sensing the conversation was about to take a turn neither of them could predict. What happened? Claire asked. Why was I given up for adoption? Why did I never know anything about you? Miranda looked toward the shop door, making sure no one was listening. I can't talk about this here, she said quietly. Come with me. There are things you need to know, but not in this place. She led them through a curtain to the back room, a small space full of rolled fabrics and cardboard boxes. There was a work table with an old sewing machine and 3 worn chairs. Sit down, Miranda offered. This is going to take a while. Claire and Sophie sat together, their shoulders touching like a mutual anchor. Miranda stood for a moment, watching them with an expression Claire couldn't decipher. Before I begin, Miranda said, I need to ask you something. Who raised you? Eleanor Walsh? Yes. And did she treat you well? The question caught Claire off guard. Yes, she was a good mother, strict but loving. She gave me everything I needed. Miranda seemed both relieved and devastated at the same time. Then I did the right thing, she murmured to herself. At least I did that much right. What are you talking about? Claire's voice rose with frustration. I don't understand anything. Why did you give me up? How did you know Eleanor? What happened 30 years ago? Miranda finally sat down, her movements slow and weary. Your story begins before you were born, she began. It begins with me and Eleanor, and with a love the world wasn't ready to understand. If this doesn't deserve a like, I don't know what does. The year was 1989. Miranda was 24 and worked as a teacher at a rural school near Santa Fe. Eleanor, 22, had come to the area as a volunteer for a literacy program. She came from New York, from a wealthy family on the Upper East Side, and was trying to escape an arranged engagement she didn't want. From the first moment I saw her, I knew something had changed, Miranda recalled, her gaze lost in the past. Eleanor was different from anyone I'd ever met. She had a way of looking at the world that made me feel like anything was possible. They fell in love in secret. In that era, in that place, a love between 2 women was unthinkable, dangerous. The hidden meetings, the letters passed in class, the stolen kisses in the dark New Mexico nights. Everything had to be concealed. Everything had to be a lie on the outside to be true between them. We were happy, Miranda said. For almost 2 years, we were the happiest people in the world, until Eleanor's family found out. Eleanor's father had sent someone to investigate why his daughter wouldn't return to New York, why she was rejecting the suitors they sent her. When he discovered the truth, his fury was absolute. They threatened me, Miranda continued. They told me if I didn't stay away from Eleanor, they would ruin my life. They would take my job, my reputation, everything. And Eleanor, they locked her away. They took her back to New York and never let me see her again. Claire listened with her heart in her throat. She had never imagined her adoptive mother had lived such a life. And me? She asked. Where do I fit into this story? Miranda looked her directly in the eyes. Months after they separated Eleanor from me, I discovered I was pregnant. Pregnant? But by whom? Shame crossed Miranda's face. There was a man in town, Thomas. He was good to me. He truly cared about me. When I felt alone, when I thought I'd lost Eleanor forever, I sought comfort where I shouldn't have. It was a mistake. A mistake that gave me the most valuable thing in my life. Me. You. Miranda reached toward Claire but stopped halfway, as if unsure she had permission to touch her. When you were born, I knew I couldn't raise you alone. I had no money. My family had turned their backs on me because of the rumors about me and Eleanor. And Thomas. Thomas had died in a car accident 3 months before you were born. So why Eleanor? Claire asked. How did I end up with her if you two were separated? Because Maggie found me. Aunt Maggie, Miranda explained, was Eleanor's cousin, the only member of the Walsh family who hadn't condemned their love. Maggie traveled to New Mexico in secret when she heard about the pregnancy and proposed a solution. Eleanor couldn't have children, Miranda said. Years after they separated us, she married a man her family chose. But the marriage was a disaster. He was abusive. She left him after 2 years, and when Maggie told her about you, Eleanor came looking for me. Eleanor came here? Yes, in March 1991, when you were just a few months old. The photo. That was the date on the photo. The moment Eleanor had held Claire for the first time. She cried when she saw you, Miranda remembered. She said you were perfect, that you were the only good thing that had come from all the pain we'd lived through. And she asked me. She begged me to let her raise you. And you agreed? Claire's voice broke. Just like that? It wasn't just like that, Miranda replied firmly. It was the hardest decision of my life. But Eleanor could give you everything I couldn't. Education, stability, a future. And I wanted you to have the best life possible, even if that meant not being part of it. Sophie, who had remained silent all this time, finally spoke. But why the secret? Why did they never tell Claire the truth? Miranda sighed deeply. That was a condition from Eleanor's family. They accepted the adoption only if I disappeared completely, if I never contacted you, if I never existed for you. They said it was the only way to protect the family's reputation, to protect Eleanor. And I was so broken that I agreed. Claire stood up abruptly. She needed to move. She needed to process everything she was hearing. She walked to the wall and stood staring at a hanging textile, not really seeing it. All these years, she murmured. Eleanor knew. She knew who you were. She knew where I came from, and she never said anything. Eleanor protected me in her own way, Miranda said. She kept her promise to give you a good life, and I kept mine to stay away. Until now. Claire turned to look at her. Why now? Why did Maggie leave that letter? Because Maggie knew something I didn't. What? Miranda stood and pulled a folder full of papers from a drawer. 6 months ago, I received a legal notification. Someone is challenging your adoption. Someone wants to annul it. The folder landed on the table with a heavy thud. Claire opened it with trembling hands. Inside were legal documents, summonses, sworn statements, and a name that appeared again and again. Robert Walsh. Who is Robert Walsh? Sophie asked, reading over Claire's shoulder. Eleanor's brother, Miranda answered, and the man who always hated her for being different. Claire felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. She vaguely remembered Uncle Robert, a serious man who appeared at family gatherings and looked at her mother with barely disguised contempt. She had never understood why. Now she was beginning to. What's he claiming? Claire asked, leafing through the documents. That the adoption was fraudulent, that Eleanor never had legal rights over you, and that... Miranda hesitated a moment. That you were raised in a morally unfit environment. Unfit environment? Sophie repeated with disbelief. What does that mean? Miranda looked at them both with sadness. It means he knows about you two, about your relationship, and he wants to use it against you." The world stopped. Claire felt all the air leave the room. Sophie's expression hardened, her jaw tensed. "How could he know about us?" Claire asked. "I don't know. But Robert was always a man who held long grudges. When Eleanor died 2 years ago..." "Eleanor died?" Claire interrupted. "My mother... Eleanor died?" The silence that followed was devastating. Miranda looked at her with confusion. "You didn't know?" "Of course I knew," Claire said, feeling reality distorting around her. "But you just said Eleanor asked you to let her raise me. You spoke of her as if..." "I'm sorry," Miranda apologized. "I thought that... when I started telling the story, I didn't mean to confuse you. Eleanor passed away 2 years ago from a heart attack. It was sudden. I found out through Maggie." Claire sank into the chair. Eleanor's death had been the worst moment of her life. 2 years ago, getting that call, rushing to the hospital only to find it was already too late, and now discovering that her entire relationship with that woman had been built on secrets. Sophie knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Breathe," she said softly. "I'm here." Claire breathed, once, twice. The world stopped spinning so fast. "Eleanor's brother," she finally said, looking at Miranda. "What exactly does he want?" "He wants to invalidate the adoption, declare you legally an orphan of unknown origin. And if he succeeds..." "If he succeeds what?" "He could claim Eleanor's estate, everything she left you. The apartment, the savings, everything. He says that since the adoption was illegal, you have no right to any of it." Claire felt rage beginning to grow inside her. Not for the money. The money meant little to her, but for the injustice, for the fact that a man who had never loved her now wanted to erase her from her own family's history. "He can't do that," she said firmly. "I'm a lawyer. I know the law. An adoption can't be annulled just like that after more than 30 years. "I hope so," Miranda replied. "But Robert has money. He has connections. And he has something else." "What?" "He has witnesses. People from back then who are willing to testify that Eleanor and I had a relationship. That the adoption was an arrangement between 2 women to raise a child outside of morality and proper standards." Sophie stood, her face reflecting a mixture of indignation and determination. "That's ridiculous," she said. "That's homophobia, disguised as legality." "I know," Miranda agreed. "But in some courts, especially in conservative areas, those arguments still carry weight." Claire looked at the documents on the table. Dates, stamps, signatures. The bureaucracy of hatred perfectly organized. "When is the first hearing?" she asked. "In 3 weeks, at a family court in Manhattan. 3 weeks, 21 days to prepare a defense, to unravel 30 years of secrets, to face a man who wanted to destroy everything she was." "I'm going to fight this," Claire said, standing. "I'm not going to let that man erase me." Miranda looked at her with an expression that combined pride and pain. "You're just like Eleanor," she said. "She never gave up either." "I'm not like Eleanor," Claire replied. "I'm me, and I'm going to prove I have as much right to exist as anyone." They left the shop an hour later, with more questions than answers, but also with a clear purpose. Miranda had given them copies of all the documents, along with contact information and names of people who might help. The midday sun blazed over the streets of Taos, but Claire barely noticed. She walked in silence beside Sophie, processing everything she had learned. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked after several minutes. "No," Claire admitted, "but I will be." They stopped at a bench near the plaza. The sound of a church bell resonated in the thin mountain air. "Everything I believed about my life was a lie," Claire said, looking at the sky. "My name, my origin, the relationship between my mother and Miranda. Everything." "Not everything," Sophie corrected. "You're real. What you feel is real. And what we have is real." Claire looked at her with eyes full of tears. "How can you be so sure?" Sophie smiled softly. "Because I know you. I've seen you at your best and worst moments. I've seen how you defend others, how you fight for what's right. That's not a lie. That's you." They embraced there, in the middle of the plaza, not caring about the glances of passers-by. Two women holding each other against the storm. "We have to get back to New York," Claire said when they separated. "I need to review all my documents, talk to colleagues who know family law, build a case. And Miranda? She'll come to testify. She's our most important witness, the only one who can tell the complete truth." That night, in the inn, Claire couldn't sleep. She stayed up reviewing the documents Miranda had given them, taking notes, identifying inconsistencies in Robert Walsh's arguments. Sophie found her at 3 a.m, her eyes red and her back hunched over the table. "You have to rest," she said, massaging her shoulders. "I can't. Every minute counts." "Claire," Sophie knelt beside her. "You're not going to be able to fight this battle if you destroy yourself first. Come to bed. We'll continue tomorrow." Claire wanted to resist, but exhaustion was stronger. She let herself be guided to bed and curled up next to Sophie, feeling the warmth of her body like a refuge. "I'm scared," she confessed in the darkness. "I know. Not of losing the case. I'm scared of what I might still discover, of what else they might have hidden from me." Sophie held her tighter. "Then we'll discover it together, whatever it is." Claire closed her eyes. Sleep came eventually, but it was restless, full of fragmented images. The old photograph, Miranda's face, the legal documents, the hateful gaze of a man she barely remembered. The next morning, they took the first flight back to New York. On the plane, Claire checked her emails and found one that made her go pale. "What is it?" Sophie asked, seeing her expression. "It's from my office. Robert Walsh moved up the hearing. It's no longer in 3 weeks. When is it?" "In 10 days. The plane landed at JFK at 4 p.m. The familiar Manhattan skyline welcomed them through the windows. Claire turned on her phone and found 3 voicemails. One from her boss asking why she hadn't been at work, another from a friend inviting her to dinner, and the third was from an unknown number. "Ms. Walsh, this is Harold Foster. I represent your Uncle Robert's interests in the adoption annulment case. I'd like to meet with you to discuss a possible resolution before the hearing. Call me at this number." Claire deleted the message without hesitation. "I'm not negotiating with him," she told Sophie as they waited for their luggage. "I'm not giving him the satisfaction." "Are you sure? Maybe you should hear what he has to say." "I know exactly what he has to say. He wants me to give up my inheritance in exchange for him dropping the case. He wants to buy my silence. But my identity isn't for sale." Sophie nodded, though her expression showed concern. "Just promise me you won't do anything impulsive." "I promise." They arrived at the Park Slope apartment at nightfall. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. Aunt Maggie's box on the table, the photos scattered about, the empty manila envelope. Claire sat on the couch and breathed deeply. The familiar smell of home comforted her for a moment. "I'm going to make some dinner," Sophie said, heading to the kitchen. "I'm not hungry." "I know. But you're going to eat anyway." Claire smiled despite everything. Sophie always knew how to take care of her, even when she didn't know how to take care of herself. While Sophie cooked, Claire reviewed the documents once more. Something didn't add up. Robert Walsh had initiated the process just months after Maggie's death, as if he'd been waiting, as if he knew she was the last barrier between him and his objective. "Sophie," she called from the living room, "do you remember if Maggie mentioned anything about Robert in the letter?" Sophie poked her head out from the kitchen. "Not that I recall. Why?" "Because the timing is too precise. Robert starts the case just when the only person who knew the whole truth can no longer testify. It's like someone tipped him off." "You think there's a leak?" "I think someone has been passing information about my family for years, and I need to find out who." Dinner was quiet. Pasta with tomato sauce, simple but comforting. Claire ate without really tasting the food, her mind elsewhere. After dinner, she called a colleague from the firm, Marina Sullivan, a specialist in family law. "Claire, what's going on?" Marina answered on the second ring. "Your boss is furious you haven't been in. I need your help. It's personal." She explained everything: the photo, the letter, the trip to New Mexico, Miranda, the annulment case. Marina listened without interrupting. "This is serious," she finally said. "American law protects finalized adoptions, but if Robert can prove fraud in the original process, can he do that? It depends on what evidence he has. Do you have access to your adoption file?" "I have what Miranda gave me, but I need the official file from the court where it was processed. I can help you request it. But Claire, prepare yourself for what you might find. Sometimes family secrets are darker than we imagine." They hung up with a plan. Marina would get the official file. Claire would prepare her defense, and they would meet in 3 days to review the strategy. That night, lying beside Sophie in the darkness, Claire finally let the tears fall. "Why didn't she tell me?" she whispered. "Eleanor had 30 years to tell me the truth. Why did she wait until she could no longer explain?" Sophie held her without saying anything. Sometimes silence was the only possible answer. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Claire took leave from work claiming a family emergency. Marina got the adoption file, which turned out to be incomplete. Pages were missing, signatures, documents that should have been there. "Someone tampered with this file," Marina said as they reviewed it in her office. "Look, here should be the biological mother's consent, but the page is blank. And here, the judge's signature looks different from the others." "Are you saying the adoption was illegal?" "I'm saying there are irregularities that a good lawyer can exploit, and Robert has good lawyers." Claire felt the weight of the world falling on her shoulders. "What are my options?" "Find someone who can testify about how the adoption really happened. Someone who was present. Someone who knows what happened to those documents." "Miranda." "Exactly. But we need more. We need documentary evidence that Eleanor raised you with love, that she gave you a good life, that the adoption, irregular or not, was in your best interest. If any part of this story resembles your life, the hype button helps make sure it doesn't go unheard." Claire spent the following days gathering evidence: photos from her childhood, school reports, letters Eleanor had written her over the years. Each document was a testament to the love she had received, to the life she had built. Sophie helped her organize everything into labeled folders. She also contacted family friends who could serve as character witnesses, neighbors who had watched Claire grow up, teachers who had educated her, colleagues who could attest to her professional integrity. "This is overwhelming," Claire said one night, surrounded by papers and photographs. "I know, but we're getting there. I don't know what I'd do without you." Sophie took her hand. "You don't have to find out. I'm here." The day before the hearing, Miranda arrived in New York. Claire and Sophie picked her up at Penn Station. The woman seemed smaller outside her shop, more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," Claire told her. "Don't thank me," Miranda replied. "I should have done this years ago. I should have fought for you from the beginning." They took her to the Park Slope apartment. Miranda looked around, absorbing the details of the place where her daughter had built her life. "It's beautiful," she commented. Eleanor had good taste. "Sophie decorated most of it," Claire corrected. "After Eleanor died, I couldn't keep things the way they were." Miranda nodded with understanding. "Grief changes us. It forces us to rebuild." The three of them sat in the living room, with cups of tea that no one really touched. "I need to ask you something," Claire said after a long silence. "When you signed the adoption papers, did you know there were irregularities?" Miranda lowered her gaze. "I knew it wasn't a normal process. Eleanor and Maggie handled everything. They told me it was better that way, that the bureaucracy would only complicate things. I was so desperate to give you a better life that I didn't ask questions." "And afterward? Didn't you ever wonder if they'd done something illegal?" "I wondered 1,000 times. But it was too late. You already had a life, a family. What was I going to accomplish by uncovering all that?" Claire felt frustration growing inside her, but she contained it. There was no point in blaming Miranda now. What was done was done. "Tomorrow at the hearing," she said, changing the subject. "Robert's lawyer is going to try to make you look like an irresponsible mother who abandoned her daughter for convenience." "I know. I need you to tell the truth, the whole truth, about yourself, about Eleanor, about why you made the decision you made." Miranda looked her in the eyes. "Are you sure? That truth includes things that could be used against you too." "I know," Claire repeated, "but I'd rather face the truth than keep living in a lie." The night before the hearing, Claire couldn't sleep. She got up at 4 a.m. and sat on the fire escape, watching the city lights that never turned off. Sophie found her there an hour later, with a blanket over her shoulders and a cup of cold coffee in her hands. "Nervous?" she asked, sitting beside her. "Terrified." "That's normal." "It's not just the case," Claire admitted. "It's everything. My whole life has been a construction based on secrets. Who am I really if everything I thought I knew was false?" Sophie looked at her tenderly. "You're the woman I met 6 years ago at that art gallery in Chelsea. The one who argued with me about the meaning of a photograph for 2 hours. The one who invited me for terrible coffee at a corner in the village. The one who made me believe it was worth taking a chance on love. Sophie, let me finish. You're the bravest, most stubborn, most passionate person I know. And that doesn't depend on who gave birth to you or who raised you. That's you. Just you." Claire felt tears running down her cheeks. "What if I lose tomorrow? What if Robert wins and they take everything from me? Then we'll start over. Together. Because what we have doesn't depend on an inheritance or a last name. It depends on us." They embraced on the fire escape, with the dawn painting the sky pink and orange over the Manhattan skyline. "I love you," Claire whispered. "I love you too," Sophie replied. "Now let's go inside. You have a battle to win." The family courthouse in downtown Manhattan smelled of old case files and contained desperation. Claire had been in dozens of courtrooms throughout her career, but never as the accused, never with her own identity at stake. They arrived early, at 8 a.m, when the hallways were still half empty. Sophie walked beside her, dressed in a navy blue blazer Claire had never seen her wear. Miranda followed a few steps behind, nervous, rubbing her hands as if trying to erase 30 years of guilt. Marina was waiting for them at the entrance to courtroom 4. "Ready?" she asked, though her tone suggested she knew the answer. No, Claire admitted, but let's do this anyway. They entered the courtroom. It was smaller than Claire had imagined, with faded beige walls and a ceiling fan that spun lazily without managing to cool the stuffy air. The judge's bench dominated the front, flanked by flags and an official seal. And there, on the opposite side of the room, was him. Robert Walsh. Claire hadn't seen him in years, not since Eleanor's funeral. He had aged poorly, thinning hair combed back, prominent jowls, the small calculating eyes of a man who had spent his life accumulating resentments. Beside him, a lawyer in an expensive suit reviewed papers with a bored expression. Robert looked at her when she entered. There was no hatred in that gaze. There was something worse. Satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone who believes they've already won. Sit here, Marina indicated, pointing to a table facing the judge's bench. Whatever happens, stay calm. Don't give him any excuse to discredit you. Claire nodded and took her seat. Sophie sat in the front row of benches for the public, next to Miranda. Their eyes met for a moment, and Sophie gave her a small smile of encouragement. The judge entered at 9 o'clock sharp. He was a man in his 60s, with a gray mustache and an inscrutable expression. He sat down, reviewed some papers, and looked up. Case number 2847-2024. Robert Walsh versus Claire Walsh. Petition for adoption annulment. Are the parties present? Present for the plaintiff, Robert's lawyer responded. Present for the defendant, Marina said. Good. We'll proceed with opening statements. Mr. Foster, you may begin. Robert's lawyer stood with the leisurely pace of someone who has all the time in the world. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Robert Walsh, brother of the deceased Eleanor Walsh, brings this annulment petition based on serious irregularities in the adoption process of Ms. Claire, which occurred in August 1991. Claire felt her stomach clench. This was how it began. This was how a life was dismantled, piece by piece. The irregularities we present are as follows, Foster continued, consulting a document. First, the original adoption file contains missing pages, inconsistent signatures, and documents that don't correspond to official formats of the time. Second, there is no verifiable record of the biological mother's informed consent. And third, he paused dramatically, looking toward where Sophie sat. Third, there are testimonies indicating that the adoption was a private arrangement between Mrs. Eleanor Walsh and the minor's biological mother, motivated by a personal relationship between both women, which, in 1991, contravened provisions regarding moral fitness to adopt. A murmur ran through the small courtroom. Claire felt the blood rising to her face, but she maintained her composure. She knew this was coming. She had prepared. What do you intend to prove with this, counselor? The judge asked. That the adoption was fraudulent from its origin, Your Honor. That the minor was given to a person who did not meet the legal and moral requirements to adopt, and that, therefore, all rights derived from that adoption, including inheritance rights, are null. The judge nodded slowly. Ms. Sullivan, your turn. Marina stood with confidence. Your Honor, Mr. Walsh's petition has no legal or moral foundation. Allow me to explain why. Claire watched her lawyer, silently thanking her professional calm. First, regarding the alleged documentary irregularities. It's true the file presents some inconsistencies. However, these inconsistencies were common in private adoptions of the early 90s, especially those arranged across state lines, where procedures didn't always follow standard protocols. That doesn't make them legal, Foster interrupted. Let her finish, the judge ordered. Marina continued. Second, regarding the biological mother's consent, we have here present Mrs. Miranda Hayes, my client's biological mother, who is prepared to testify under oath that she gave her voluntary and conscious consent for the adoption. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, He clearly hadn't expected Miranda to be present. And third, regarding the alleged moral unfitness of the adoptive parent. Marina paused. Your Honor, the plaintiff's argument is based on discriminatory prejudices that have no place in American law. A person's sexual orientation is not, and has never been, a legal impediment to adoption. In 1991, it was grounds for consideration, Foster interjected. Not exactly, Marina corrected. In 1991, there was no specific legislation on the matter in New York. Decisions were left to the judge's discretion, and the judge who approved this adoption considered Eleanor Walsh to be a fit mother. That decision has stood for over 30 years. The judge raised his hand to silence both parties. I'm going to hear testimony before ruling on these legal questions. Who will be your first witness, Mr. Foster? We call Mrs. Martha Goodwin, neighbor of the deceased Eleanor Walsh during the years 1989 to 1993. An older woman entered the courtroom. She must have been about 70, with hair dyed an improbable blonde and an expression of moral superiority that Claire recognized immediately. She had seen her before, at family gatherings during her childhood. Always watching her with disapproval, always whispering things into other women's ears. Martha took the stand and was sworn in. Mrs. Goodwin, Foster began, can you tell us what kind of relationship Mrs. Eleanor Walsh had with the biological mother of the child, Claire? Martha settled into the chair, clearly enjoying the attention. Well, everyone in the building knew. Eleanor and that woman, Miranda, were intimate. You'd see them together all the time, holding hands, sharing looks that weren't normal between friends. And what was the community's opinion of this relationship? Well, it was scandalous, obviously. Decent families didn't approve of that kind of behavior. That's why Eleanor's father intervened, to save the family's honor. Claire clenched her fists under the table. So that's what had happened. That's how they had separated Eleanor from Miranda, with the complicity of gossiping neighbors and a family obsessed with appearances. And when the child came to live with Eleanor? Foster continued. How was that? It was very strange. Eleanor showed up one day with a baby and said she'd adopted her, but no one believed it. We all thought the baby was hers and some man she'd met, or worse. Worse. That the baby was that woman's, Miranda's, and Eleanor had brought her to raise as if she were her own. A way to stay connected to her. Love her. The word fell like a stone in a pond. Claire saw Sophie tense in her seat, saw Miranda lower her gaze. Objection, Marina said. Speculation without foundation. Sustained, the judge responded. Witness. Limit yourself to facts you directly witnessed. Martha seemed disappointed but continued. What I can say is that Eleanor never married, never had a known boyfriend after she came back from New Mexico. And she raised that child alone, which, in my opinion, was not an adequate environment. Thank you, Mrs. Goodwin, Foster said. No further questions. Marina rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Goodwin, did you ever see Eleanor Walsh mistreat her adopted daughter? No, but did you ever see the child Claire malnourished, poorly dressed, or in conditions of neglect? No, Eleanor was always very careful with her, but the problem is... Did the child attend school regularly? Yes. Did she have friends? Did she participate in normal activities for her age? I suppose so, but that doesn't change the fact that... Mrs. Goodwin, Marina interrupted firmly. What exactly was your relationship with the Walsh family? Martha seemed disconcerted by the question. I was a neighbor, an acquaintance of the family. Were you aware that Eleanor's father, Arthur Walsh, owed money to your husband? Martha's face turned red. That has nothing to do with... Answer the question. Yes, there was a debt, but it was eventually paid. And isn't it true that this debt was settled in exchange for you providing information about Eleanor to her family? That you were, in essence, a spy?" "Objection," Foster shouted. "She's accusing the witness without evidence." "I withdraw the question," Marina said. "No further questions for this witness." Martha stepped down from the stand with a furious expression. She had come off badly, but Claire knew the damage was already done. The judge had heard the words, intimate, lover, inadequate environment. Those words would keep resonating. The next witness was a former employee of the court, where the adoption had been processed. A nervous man in his 70s who testified under oath that he remembered irregularities in the process. "The file arrived almost complete," he said. "It just needed a few signatures. We didn't do the normal verification because, well, someone from above told us to approve it quickly." "Someone from above?" Foster asked. "Who?" "I don't remember the name, but it was someone with influence, someone who knew Mrs. Walsh." Marina tried to discredit the testimony by pointing out that more than 30 years had passed, and the witness's memory wasn't reliable, but the damage, once again, was done. Lunchtime came, and the judge declared a 2-hour recess. "How are we doing?" Claire asked Marina as they left the courtroom. "Could be worse, but we need something strong this afternoon. Is Miranda ready to testify?" "I think so." "Good, because her testimony could change everything." They had lunch at a deli nearby without much appetite. Miranda barely touched her food. "I'm going to tell everything," she said suddenly. "Everything that happened. How I met Eleanor. How we fell in love. How they separated us. Everything." "Are you sure?" Claire asked. "Once you say it, there's no going back. I've spent 30 years keeping this secret. It's time for the truth to come out." Sophie, who had remained quiet almost all morning, finally spoke. "There's something you should know." The three of them looked at her. "This morning, while we were waiting to go in, Robert approached me." "What?" Claire felt her blood boil. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to upset you before the hearing, but he said something I think is important." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Your girlfriend can fight all she wants, but I have an ace up my sleeve that even she doesn't know about. Ask Miranda about the 1992 agreement.'" All eyes turned to Miranda. The woman had gone pale. "What agreement?" Claire asked, her voice sharp. Miranda closed her eyes. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to talk about this." "Well, you're going to have to. Now." Miranda took a deep breath. "A year after the adoption, Eleanor's family contacted me. Arthur, the father, specifically. He offered me money. A lot of money. In exchange for signing a document giving up any future rights to you." Claire felt the floor moving beneath her feet. "Did you accept?" "I had no choice. They threatened to take you away from Eleanor if I didn't sign. They said they would make it look like the adoption had been illegal and send you to foster care. I couldn't let that happen." "And the money?" "I used it to open my shop, to build a life. But every dollar burned in my hands. Every day reminded me of what I had done." Marina intervened. "Do you have a copy of that document?" "No, I only signed once. They kept the original." "If Robert has that document," Marina said slowly, "he can argue that the adoption was essentially a sale, that they bought a child." The silence that followed was devastating. Claire got up from the table. She needed air. She needed to think. She left the deli and walked to a bench on the sidewalk, sitting with her head in her hands. Sophie followed moments later. "Don't say anything," Claire asked before Sophie could speak. "Just stay with me." Sophie sat beside her and held her. Claire let herself be held, feeling the weight of each revelation accumulating on her shoulders. "My entire life," she murmured, "was a transaction. They bought me, like I was furniture, like I was a thing." "That's not true," Sophie replied firmly. "Eleanor loved you. Whatever else the others did doesn't change that." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I knew her, remember? The last years of her life, when we were already together. I saw how she looked at you. I saw how she talked about you. That wasn't a transaction. That was pure love." Claire felt tears running down her cheeks. "What if it's not enough? What if Robert is right and all of this was illegal from the beginning? Then we'll fight another way, but you're not giving up. Not now. Not after everything you've discovered." They returned to the deli where Marina and Miranda waited with somber expressions. "We have an hour before the session resumes," Marina said. "I need you to tell me everything about that agreement, Miranda. Every detail." Miranda nodded and began to talk. The agreement, she explained, had been signed at a law office in Manhattan in March 1992. Arthur Walsh had insisted everything be legal, with witnesses and official seals. The document stipulated that Miranda gave up any claim to the child Claire in exchange for a sum of money that, at the time, was considerable. "How much?" Marina asked. $50,000. Claire calculated mentally. In 1992, that was equivalent to several years of average salary. "Who was the lawyer?" "A man named Gardner, I think, or Garrison. I don't remember well. He had an office near Wall Street." Marina took notes. "If we can find that document and prove it was signed under duress, we can invalidate it." "How?" Claire asked. Miranda just admitted she signed it voluntarily. "Not voluntarily," Miranda corrected. "They threatened me. They told me if I didn't sign, they would destroy your life. I had no choice." "That's duress," Marina confirmed. "But we need proof. Was anyone else present when they made those threats?" Miranda shook her head. "Just Arthur and me, and he's dead." "And Eleanor? Did she know about the agreement?" The hesitation on Miranda's face was answer enough. "Eleanor knew," Miranda confirmed. "Her father told her, to show her he was in control. That even though she had managed to keep you, he would always have that document as a weapon." "And Eleanor never contacted you after that?" "Once, 5 years later. She sent me a letter through Maggie. It said she was sorry, that she had tried to get the document back, but her father had hidden it where no one could find it." "Until now," Claire said bitterly. "Until Robert found it." They returned to the courthouse with the weight of this new information. Marina had adjusted her strategy. When Miranda testified, she wouldn't try to hide the agreement. Instead, she would use it to show the cruelty of the Walsh family. The afternoon session began at 4. "We call Mrs. Miranda Hayes to testify," Marina announced. Miranda walked to the stand with slow but determined steps. Claire noticed her hands were no longer trembling. There was something in her expression she hadn't seen before. Determination. "Mrs. Hayes," Marina began, "can you tell us what your relationship is to the defendant, Claire Walsh?" "I'm her biological mother." "And can you explain the circumstances under which you gave your daughter up for adoption?" Miranda began to tell her story. She spoke of her youth in Santa Fe, of her work as a teacher, of Eleanor's arrival in her life. She spoke of their love, their joy, of how the world seemed full of possibilities when they were together. And then she spoke of the separation, of the threats, of the unexpected pregnancy, of the decision to give up her daughter to give her a better life. "It wasn't an easy decision," she said, her voice breaking. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. but I did it out of love. Out of love for my daughter, and out of love for Eleanor. The judge listened attentively, his face impossible to read. Now, Marina continued, can you tell us about the agreement you signed in 1992? A murmur ran through the courtroom. Robert leaned forward, clearly surprised they were bringing up the topic themselves. Miranda described the meeting with Arthur Walsh. The threats, the emotional blackmail, the signing of the document. They told me if I didn't sign, they would make Claire end up in foster care, that they would use their power and influence to destroy Eleanor, that they would ruin everything we had built. I had no choice. I signed to protect my daughter. And how have you felt these 30 years carrying that secret? Tears began to run down Miranda's cheeks. Guilty, every day of my life, but also relieved to know Claire was okay, that Eleanor loved her, that my sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Foster stood for cross-examination with the expression of a predator. Mrs. Hayes, you just admitted you sold your daughter for $50,000. Is that correct? I didn't sell her. They forced me. Yes or no, Mrs. Hayes? Did you accept money in exchange for giving up your rights to the child? Yes, but... And did you use that money for your personal benefit? I opened a business. Yes, but... And for 30 years you made no attempt to contact your daughter or report this alleged duress? Miranda lowered her gaze. No. Why not? Because I was afraid. Because I thought I was protecting Claire. Or because you were satisfied with the deal you'd made. No further questions. Marina stood again. Mrs. Hayes, one last question. Why did you decide to break your silence now? Miranda looked directly at Claire. Because my daughter deserves to know the truth. Because I've spent 30 years living with the shame of what I did, and I can't anymore. And because when I learned Robert wanted to take everything from her, I knew I had to fight. Even if it's late. Even if I can't recover the lost years. At least I can try to give her justice. The session was suspended until the next day. The judge needed time to review the evidence and testimony. They left the courthouse at sunset. The Manhattan sky was painted orange and purple, the buildings casting long shadows across the streets. What do you think is going to happen? Claire asked Marina. Honestly, I don't know. The judge is hard to read, but I think Miranda's testimony was powerful. It showed the human side of the story. And the agreement? Can Robert use it against us? He can try, but the fact that we brought it up first gives us an advantage. We don't look like we're hiding anything. They said goodbye to Marina and walked toward the subway. Sophie took Claire's hand, a simple gesture that meant everything. How do you feel? Sophie asked. Empty. Like everything I thought I knew about my life has been drained away and nothing's left. A lot remains, Sophie replied. We remain. Claire looked at her. Aren't you tired of all this? Of all this craziness? Sophie smiled. I'm exhausted, but I'm not going anywhere. Why? Because 6 years ago I promised to love you in good times and bad. Maybe it wasn't a legal marriage, but to me it was real. And this is the bad part. But we're going to get through this. They arrived at the apartment exhausted. Miranda had stayed at a hotel nearby, needing space to process everything she had testified to. That night, Claire dreamed of Eleanor. In the dream, they were in the kitchen of her childhood home, making Christmas cookies. Eleanor was teaching her how to roll out the dough, how to use the cookie cutters, how to decorate each one with precision. Why didn't you tell me? Claire asked in the dream. Because I was afraid, Eleanor answered. Afraid of losing you. Afraid you would hate me. Do I hate you? Claire asked. Eleanor smiled sadly. I don't know, sweetheart. Only you know that. Claire woke with tears in her eyes. Sophie was sleeping beside her, her breathing soft and steady. The clock read 4 a.m. She got up silently and went to the living room. Maggie's box was still on the table, half empty. Claire began to go through what remained. More letters, more receipts, more fragments of a life she was only beginning to understand. At the bottom of the box, she found something she hadn't seen before. A small envelope, sealed, with her name written in Eleanor's handwriting. For Claire, when I'm gone. Claire opened it with trembling hands. My dear daughter, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you've probably discovered things I never wanted you to know. The first thing I need to tell you is that I love you. I have loved you from the moment Miranda placed you in my arms, and I will love you beyond my last breath. The second thing is an apology. I know I lied to you. I know I hid the truth about your origin, about Miranda, about everything, and I know you're probably furious with me. You have every right to be. But let me explain why I did it. When I met Miranda, I was young and idealistic. I believed love was enough to overcome any obstacle. I was wrong. The world wasn't ready for us. My family even less so. When they separated me from her, a part of me died. I married a man I didn't love, lived a life I didn't want, tried to be what everyone expected me to be. But I could never forget her. When Maggie told me Miranda had had a daughter, that she was alone and desperate, I knew it was my chance at redemption. I couldn't save my love with Miranda, but I could save something of that love. You. I raised you the best I could. I tried to give you everything I didn't have. Freedom, education, the chance to be whoever you wanted to be. If I failed at anything, I ask your forgiveness. The agreement with my father was my greatest shame. I let him control the situation because I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything, my family, my reputation, and above all, you. It was cowardly of me. I admit it. But there's something my father never knew, and that you need to know now. The document Miranda signed has a copy. I made it secretly, the day my father showed it to me to humiliate me. That copy is in a safe deposit box at First Manhattan Bank, the branch on Court Street in Brooklyn. The account number is in the enclosed slip. Use that document as you need to. Prove my father acted with malice. Prove Miranda was coerced. Prove that, despite all the irregularities, the love we felt for you was always genuine. And one last thing, sweetheart. Don't be afraid to love. I saw how Sophie looks at you. I saw how you look at her. That love is real. It's beautiful. And it deserves to be celebrated. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. With all my love, now and always, your mother, Eleanor. Claire held the letter against her chest, crying silently. Eleanor had left her a weapon that could change everything. The First Manhattan Bank branch on Court Street opened at 9 a.m. Claire was waiting outside since 8, with Sophie by her side and identification documents in hand. Do you think it's really there? Sophie asked. There's only one way to find out. When the doors opened, Claire went straight to the safe deposit box area. She presented the account number, her ID, and the document proving she was Eleanor's heir. The manager made her wait 20 minutes while everything was verified. Claire felt every second like an eternity. Everything is in order, the manager finally said. Follow me, please. He led her to an underground vault, filled with small numbered metal boxes. He found the corresponding one and opened it with a master key. I'll leave you to review in private, he said, discreetly withdrawing. Claire opened the box with her heart racing. Inside were several envelopes. The first contained antique jewelry, a pearl necklace, gold earrings, a ring with a small emerald, items that had probably belonged to Eleanor's mother. The second envelope contained cash, several bundles of bills that Claire didn't bother to count, and the third, the most important, contained documents. There was the copy of the 1992 agreement, just as Eleanor had promised. But there was more. There were letters between Arthur Walsh and the lawyer, discussing how to pressure Miranda into signing. There was an internal family memo detailing the threats they would use. And there was something Claire hadn't expected. A handwritten will from Arthur, dated shortly before his death, where he acknowledged the agreement had been obtained through coercion and expressed his regret. "Oh my God," Claire whispered. The grandfather she had never known, the patriarch who had destroyed her mother's love, had left a confession. She didn't know why he had done it. Perhaps guilt, perhaps fear of divine judgment, perhaps simply the clarity that sometimes comes before death. But he had done it. Claire put all the documents in her bag and left the bank almost running. Sophie was waiting outside, anxious. "What did you find?" "Everything. I found everything we need." She called Marina immediately. "I need to see you before the hearing. I have new evidence. Evidence that's going to change everything." The hearing that day was scheduled for 11. Claire and Marina arrived at the courthouse an hour early to present the new evidence. The judge reviewed them with a serious expression. "These documents are extraordinary," he said. "Can you verify their authenticity?" "We can request a handwriting analysis of Arthur Walsh's will," Marina replied. "And the letters have letterheads and seals that can be verified with notarial records from the time." "Did the plaintiff know these documents existed?" "Apparently not, Your Honor. They were in a private safe deposit box belonging to the deceased Eleanor Walsh." The judge nodded slowly. "I'm going to admit this evidence, subject to verification. Mr. Foster, do you have anything to say?" Foster, clearly flustered, asked for a recess to consult with his client. Robert watched him with barely contained fury from his seat. The recess lasted an hour. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had changed. Robert no longer had that expression of satisfaction. Now he looked like a cornered animal. "Your Honor," Foster began, his voice less confident than before. "My client wishes to make a statement." "Go ahead." Robert stood. His movements were rigid, forced. "I withdraw the petition," he said through gritted teeth. A murmur of surprise ran through the courtroom. "Can you repeat that?" the judge asked. "I withdraw the adoption annulment petition. I no longer wish to continue with this case." Marina stood. "Your Honor, before the withdrawal is accepted, we request that the presented evidence be placed on record. And we also request an investigation into whether the plaintiff had prior knowledge of the coercion exercised by his father, and whether he acted in bad faith in bringing this petition." Robert went pale. "That's ridiculous," Foster protested. "My client has the right to withdraw his petition without consequences." "He has the right to withdraw it," the judge conceded. "But if there are indications he acted in bad faith, that he used the judicial system to harass the defendant with knowledge that his arguments were false, that's another matter." He looked directly at Robert. "Mr. Walsh, did you know of your father's will before bringing this petition?" Robert didn't respond. His silence was more eloquent than any words. The judge sighed. "The withdrawal of the petition is accepted, but a parallel investigation is opened for possible procedural fraud. The plaintiff must appear to testify within the next 30 days. The hearing ended. Claire left the courthouse feeling like she was floating. Sophie hugged her in the middle of the hallway, not caring who saw. "You did it," Sophie whispered in her ear. "You won." "We did it," Claire corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you." Miranda approached, her eyes full of tears. "Claire, She didn't finish the sentence. Claire hugged her, and for the first time in 30 years, mother and daughter held each other. "Thank you," Claire said, "for coming, for testifying, for facing all this. I should have done it years ago. You did it now. That's what matters." They left the courthouse together, the three women who had been shaped by secrets and lies, walking toward an uncertain but at least honest future. That night they celebrated at the Park Slope apartment. Marina joined them with a bottle of wine. They toasted to truth, to justice, to the family you choose, and not just the one you inherit. "What are you going to do now?" Marina asked Claire. "With everything you know." Claire looked at Miranda, then at Sophie. "I'm going to write the story, the true story, so no one else has to live with secrets that don't belong to them." The following weeks were about reconstruction. Claire returned to work, but with a different perspective. The cases that before seemed routine now took on new depth. She understood better the pain of her clients, the complexity of families, the invisible threads connecting past to present. Miranda returned to Taos, but now they talked regularly. Long calls where they told each other their lives, where they filled the gaps of 30 years of absence. It wasn't easy. Sometimes there were uncomfortable silences, sometimes questions that hurt. But it was real. It was honest. Sophie resumed her photography work with renewed energy. She had started a new series, titled Origins, exploring the stories of people who had discovered hidden truths about their families. Claire was her first subject, though her face never appeared directly in the photos. Only fragments, her hands holding the old photograph, her silhouette against the window, her reflection in a steamy mirror. A month after the trial, a letter arrived at the apartment. The sender was Robert Walsh. Claire hesitated before opening it. Sophie suggested burning it without reading it, but curiosity won out. "Claire, I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I acted out of greed, but also out of something older and uglier, resentment. My whole life I lived in Eleanor's shadow. She was the favorite, the brilliant one, the one who could do whatever she wanted without consequences. I was the second best, the one who always had to prove his worth. When she went off with that woman, I thought I had finally surpassed her, that I would be the legitimate heir, the one who would maintain the family's honor, but my father never forgave me for not being like her. He died disappointed in me. When Eleanor died and left everything to you, it was the final humiliation. Even from the grave, she won. You, the daughter who should never have existed, got everything while I got nothing. What I did was wrong. I know that. But I want you to understand why I did it. Not to justify myself, but so you can see that even villains have their reasons. You won't hear from me again. I'm leaving the country. I'll start over somewhere no one knows my name or my story. Your uncle, though I no longer deserve to call myself that, Robert." Claire read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in a drawer. "What did it say?" Sophie asked. "Nothing important. Just a man trying to justify the unjustifiable. Do you forgive him?" Claire thought for a moment. "No. But I'm not going to carry hatred for him either. I already have enough baggage." Time passed. The seasons changed. Fall turned to winter, winter to spring. Claire and Sophie celebrated their 7th anniversary with a quiet dinner at their favorite restaurant in the West Village. "Remember when we met?" Sophie asked while they shared a chocolate dessert. "How could I forget? You threw me out of the gallery because I was criticizing your show." "I didn't throw you out. I invited you to continue the discussion somewhere else." After calling me a pretentious ignoramus, Sophie smiled. "Well, you were saying my photos were technically competent but emotionally empty. I was wrong. I know. That's why I forgave you." They looked at each other with the complicity of those who have survived storms together. "Claire," Sophie said after a moment, "there's something I want to ask you." "What?" Sophie pulled a small box from her purse. She opened it to reveal 2 simple gold rings. "I know we've been together for years. I know we don't need a piece of paper to know what we are. But I want the world to know too. I want to be able to say when people ask who you are to me, my wife." Claire felt her heart stop. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes." "What do you say?" The tears began to fall before Claire could stop them. "I say yes. 1,000 times yes." Sophie put the ring on her finger, and then Claire put the other one on Sophie. They kissed in the middle of the restaurant, not caring about the looks. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt completely at peace. The wedding was small, intimate. They held it in the backyard of a friend's brownstone in Brooklyn, with a white tent and string lights that glowed like earthbound stars. Miranda came from New Mexico. Marina was the legal witness. A handful of close friends completed the gathering. Claire wore a simple ivory dress. Sophie, a dark blue suit with a white flower on the lapel. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not only love, but also honesty, patience, and the commitment to face together whatever life put in front of them. When the officiant declared them legally married, the small group burst into applause, but Claire barely heard them. She only had eyes for Sophie, for the woman who had been by her side at the worst moment of her life, and who would now be there for all the rest. "I love you," Claire told her. "I love you too," Sophie replied. "Now and always." After the ceremony, while the guests celebrated with music and food, Claire slipped inside the house for a moment. She needed a breather, a moment of silence. She found herself in front of Eleanor's photo that hung in the hallway. It was an image from years ago, when Eleanor was still young, and her smile didn't carry the weight of so many secrets. "I did it, Mom," Claire whispered. "I got married. I found my truth. And I'm happy." It might have been her imagination, but it seemed like Eleanor's smile grew wider. Sophie found her there a few minutes later. "Everything okay?" "Yes, I just needed a moment." Sophie hugged her from behind, also looking at Eleanor's photo. "Do you think she would have approved of this?" "I think so. I think it's exactly what she would have wanted for me." They returned to the party together, hand in hand, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives. But as Claire had learned, stories never really end. They only change form. 3 months after the wedding, Miranda called with news. "I found something," her voice said through the phone, trembling with emotion. "In my mother's old things. Something I didn't know existed." "What did you find?" "Photos. Lots of photos. From when Eleanor lived here. From when we were together. And there's one where we both appear with you, when you were a baby. The 3 of us together." Claire felt her heart tighten. "Can you send it to me? Better yet, I'm coming to the city next month. I'll bring it to you personally." When Miranda arrived, Claire and Sophie received her at the apartment. She carried an old album, its yellowed pages full of black and white and faded color photographs. And there, on the 3rd page, was the photo. Eleanor and Miranda, young and radiant, holding baby Claire together. The 3 of them looking at the camera with expressions of pure happiness, not knowing what the future held. "This is the photo I wish I'd always had," Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. Miranda put a hand on her shoulder. "Now you have it." Claire framed it and hung it next to Eleanor's photo. 2 images that told a complete story. The love that had started everything, and the woman she had become. Sophie found her that night looking at both photos, lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" "About how strange life is. About how secrets can destroy but also unite. About how a photo falling from a book led me to find my mother, to understand Eleanor, to value even more what we have." Sophie nodded. "And how everything started with a lie, but ended with the truth." "Yes, exactly that." They stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the photos. "You know what's most ironic?" Claire said finally. "What?" "Robert wanted to destroy me. He wanted to take everything I had. But in the end, all he did was give me something I never had. My complete story, my real identity, my connection with Miranda." Sophie smiled. "Sometimes villains are the best allies without knowing it. Sometimes they are." They held hands and stayed like that, looking toward the future that stretched before them, full of possibilities and free of lies. 6 months after the wedding, Claire's life had found a new rhythm. Mornings began with coffee shared on the fire escape, watching the sun rise over the Brooklyn rooftops. Afternoons passed between work and calls with Miranda, which had become a sacred ritual. And the nights. The nights belonged to Sophie. But peace, as Claire had learned, was never permanent. It all began with a call from Miranda at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. "Claire, I need you to come to Taos." Her voice sounded different, urgent. "There's something you have to see." "What's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but I found something. Something about your father." Claire felt the air escape from her lungs. In all the months of reconstructing her history, she had never thought much about Thomas, the man Miranda had briefly mentioned, the one who had died before she was born, the one who was, biologically, her father. "What did you find?" "I can't say over the phone. You have to come. Please." Sophie, who had heard the conversation from bed, was already getting up. "Let's go," she said simply. They took the first available flight. During the journey, Claire couldn't stop thinking about how little she knew about Thomas. Miranda had described him as a good man, kind, who had genuinely cared for her. But beyond that, he was a ghost, a name without a face. Albuquerque welcomed them with its familiar dry mountain air. Miranda was waiting for them at the airport, with dark circles that betrayed sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, hugging Claire tightly. "What's happening, Miranda?" "Come to the shop. I'll explain everything there." They drove through the high desert in silence. Sophie took Claire's hand, a gesture that had become her way of saying, "I'm here," without words. The craft shop was closed to the public. Miranda led them to the back room, where she had spread out a collection of documents and photographs on the work table. "A week ago, a woman came to the shop," Miranda began. She said her name was Lucy Henderson, and she was looking for Miranda Hayes. When I asked her why, she said something that stopped me cold. She paused, as if needing to gather strength to continue. She said she was Thomas's sister, your father's sister. Claire sank into a chair. Thomas had a sister? I didn't know either. He never mentioned her, but Lucy explained why. The story Miranda told was another layer of tragedy. Thomas and Lucy had grown up in a violent household on the outskirts of Santa Fe. Their father was an alcoholic, their mother submissive. When Thomas was 17, he ran away from home never to return. Lucy, 3 years younger, remained trapped until she could flee as well, years later. Thomas cut all contact with his family, Miranda explained. He never talked to me about them. I suppose he wanted to forget. "And how did this Lucy find me?" Claire asked. "Through the trial. News of the annulment case reached here. Someone mentioned there was a woman in New York fighting for her adoption, and that the biological mother was from Santa Fe. Lucy connected the dots. Sophie intervened. What does she want? Miranda looked directly at Claire. She wants to meet you. She says you're the only family she has left. Claire didn't know what to feel. She had just processed the existence of a biological mother, and now an aunt appeared. A family she never knew she had, emerging from the shadows like ghosts with names and faces. Where is she now? She's staying at a hotel near the plaza. I told her I would call you and that you would decide if you wanted to see her or not. Claire looked at Sophie, seeking guidance. It's your decision, Sophie said. But if you want my opinion, I think you should at least hear what she has to say. We've already learned that family secrets always come to light. Better to face them head on. Claire nodded slowly. Call her. Tell her I want to see her. The meeting was scheduled for that same afternoon at a cafe near the Central Plaza. Claire arrived first, with Sophie by her side as always. Miranda had decided to stay at the shop, feeling this was a moment Claire needed to experience on her own. Lucy Henderson turned out to be a woman in her mid-50s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and eyes the same dark color that Claire saw every morning in the mirror. The resemblance was undeniable. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Lucy said as she sat down. I know this must be very strange for you. Everything in my life has been strange lately, Claire replied. I'm getting used to it. Lucy smiled sadly. You look like him, like Thomas. You have his same way of speaking, direct, no beating around the bush. I never knew him. I know, and that's partly my fault. Your fault? Lucy lowered her gaze. When Thomas left home, I was 14. I was furious with him for abandoning me, for leaving me alone with our parents. I didn't understand that he was suffering too, that he needed to escape to survive. And afterward, I escaped too. I ended up in Sedona, working at whatever I could find. Eventually, I got married, had children, built a life. But I never stopped thinking about Thomas. I never stopped wondering what had become of him. When did you find out he had died? Just 2 years ago. I found his death certificate by accident, searching for documents for some paperwork. 1991. He died before I could find him, before I could ask his forgiveness for hating him all those years. Tears began to run down Lucy's cheeks. Claire felt a pang of empathy. She too knew what it was like to carry guilt and regret. And me? How did you find out about me? Miranda's name appeared in some documents related to Thomas. I started investigating. When I heard about the trial, everything clicked. You were the daughter he never knew he would have. He never knew. Thomas died 3 months before you were born, right? Miranda probably hadn't had time to tell him. Claire looked at Sophie, who nodded softly. It was true. Miranda had mentioned that Thomas died without knowing about the pregnancy. What do you want from me, Lucy? Claire asked directly. Why did you look for me? Lucy looked at her with eyes full of a mixture of hope and fear. I don't want anything material, if that's what you're thinking. I just wanted to meet you, to know who you are, to see something of my brother in you. And maybe, if you want, to have something like a family. Claire sat in silence for a long moment. Her whole life she had believed she was fatherless. Then she discovered her father had been a real man, with a history, with a sister. And now that sister was in front of her, asking for a chance. I don't know if I can give you what you're looking for, she finally said. I don't even know who I am yet, but I can try to get to know you. Slowly. No pressure. Sound okay? Lucy nodded gratefully. It's more than I expected. They stayed talking for hours. Lucy told her stories about Thomas, what he was like as a child, his dreams, his fears, the little things that made him unique. Claire absorbed every detail like a sponge, slowly building the image of a father she would never meet, but was now beginning to understand. When they said goodbye, Lucy handed her a small box. "This belonged to Thomas," she said. "I kept it all these years without knowing why. Now I know. It was for you." Claire opened the box. Inside was an antique pocket watch, with the initials TH engraved on the cover. "It was our grandfather's," Lucy explained. "The only good memory Thomas had of our family. He always carried it with him." Claire held the watch with reverence. It was heavy, solid, real. A tangible connection to the man who had given her life. "Thank you," she whispered. That night at the inn, Claire couldn't sleep. She stayed up looking at the watch, listening to its constant ticking, wondering how her life might have been if Thomas hadn't died. If he and Miranda could have raised her together. If Eleanor had never entered the equation. Sophie found her awake at 3 a.m. "Still thinking?" she asked, curling up beside her. "I can't stop." "What are you thinking about?" "About all the versions of my life that could have existed. About all the people I could have been." Sophie took her hand. "But only one version exists. This one. The one that's here, with me, now. What if this version isn't the best one? Does it matter? It's the real one. It's the only one we have. And to me, it's perfect." Claire turned to look at her. "How can you always be so sure about everything?" "I'm not sure about anything," Sophie admitted. "But I choose to believe that what we have is worth it. I choose to believe that the paths that brought us here, however twisted, were the right ones, because they brought us to each other." Claire kissed her softly. "I love you." "I love you too. Now sleep. Tomorrow there are more truths to discover." The following days were ones of exploration. Claire spent time with Lucy, learning more about the Henderson family. She discovered she had cousins in Arizona, nieces and nephews she had never met, an entire branch of the family tree that had been hidden. She also spent time with Miranda, deepening the relationship they had begun to build. They cooked together, walked through the markets of Taos, sat in silence looking at the mountains. They didn't need to fill every moment with words. Sometimes presence was enough. One afternoon, while Sophie photographed the historic adobe churches around town, Claire found herself alone with Miranda at the shop. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said. "Anything." "Did you love Thomas?" Miranda was silent for a moment, considering the question. "I cared for him," she finally replied. "He was a good man, kind, generous. He made me feel less alone after losing Eleanor. But I didn't love him the way I loved her. That would have been impossible." "Do you regret it? Being with him?" "No. He gave me you. How could I regret that?" Claire nodded. She understood. Love had many forms, many degrees. Not everything had to be absolute to be valid. "There's something else I want to ask you," Claire continued. "Something that's been going around in my head since all this started. Tell me. If you could go back, would you do things differently? Would you have kept me?" Miranda looked at her with moist eyes. "I ask myself that question every day of my life, and the answer is always the same. I don't know. I did what I thought was best at the time, with the information I had, with the resources I had. Was it the right thing? Maybe not. Maybe I should have fought harder, risked more. But I can't change the past. I can only try to do better in the present." "And the present?" Miranda smiled. The present is this: you, here, asking me difficult questions, getting to know each other after 30 years, building something new on the ruins of the old. It's not perfect, but it's real. And real is enough for me. Claire stood and hugged Miranda. It was the first time she had done so without reservations, without the barrier of decades of absence between them. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for letting me go, for letting me come back, for being here now." Miranda hugged her back, tears running freely down both their faces. "Thank you," she replied, "for giving me a second chance." They returned to New York a week later, loaded with new memories and promises of future visits. Lucy had committed to traveling to meet Claire's cousins in Arizona. Miranda had agreed to spend Christmas in Brooklyn. Life continued, different but better. A month later, Claire received a notification from the court. The investigation against Robert had concluded. He had been found guilty of procedural fraud and had been fined considerably, along with a prohibition from initiating any other legal proceedings against Claire. "It's over," Claire said, showing the document to Sophie. "Officially, it's over." Sophie hugged her. "How do you feel?" "Relieved, but also empty. Like I've been fighting for so long that I don't know what to do now that there's nothing left to fight." "Now you live," Sophie replied. "You simply live." And that's what they did. The following months were ones of normalcy, that precious normalcy you only appreciate after having lost it. Claire returned to work with renewed energy, taking cases of families in complicated situations, using her own experience to connect with her clients. Sophie continued her photography series Origins, which eventually became an exhibition that traveled to several cities across the country. Miranda came to visit every 2 months, bringing textiles from her shop and stories from Taos. Lucy joined when she could, adding her own perspective to the family gatherings. The dining table in Park Slope, which before had only known Claire and Sophie, now filled with voices and laughter. It was a strange family, assembled from pieces of different origins, united by improbable circumstances. But it was a family, and that was more than Claire had ever dreamed of having. A year after the photo fell from the book and changed everything, Claire found herself standing in front of her bedroom mirror, observing herself with new eyes. She was no longer the woman she had been. That Claire, the one who thought she knew her story, the one who lived comfortably in an identity built on lies, had disappeared. In her place was someone different, stronger, more complete, more aware of life's complexities. Sophie appeared behind her, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Ready for today?" "I think so." It was the day of Sophie's complete exhibition opening. Origins, stories of identity and belonging. The gallery in Chelsea had been reserved for a special event, where not only the photographs would be presented, but also a book compiling the stories behind each image. Claire's story was the central chapter. "I'm nervous," Claire admitted. "It's strange having my life exposed like this, for anyone to see." "Your story can help others," Sophie replied. "People going through the same thing, who discovered family secrets, who are trying to reconstruct who they are. Seeing they're not alone can make all the difference." Claire nodded. That was the reason she had agreed to participate, not for ego or recognition, but for the possibility that her experience might mean something. The gallery was packed when they arrived. Miranda and Lucy had traveled especially for the occasion. Marina was there with her husband. Colleagues from the firm, friends from college, neighbors from Park Slope. A crowd of known and unknown faces, all gathered to celebrate stories of transformation. Sophie gave a brief opening speech, explaining the concept behind the exhibition. "Origins is not just about where we come from," she said, her voice clear and confident. It's about who we choose to be. It's about the stories they tell us and the ones we decide to tell ourselves. Every person in this exhibition discovered that their identity was more complex than they believed. And each one found a way to integrate that complexity into something new, something their own. Then she invited Claire to say a few words. Claire walked toward the small stage with her heart pounding. She looked at the audience, searching for familiar faces. She found Sophie, smiling at her with pride, Miranda, with tears in her eyes, Lucy, nodding encouragingly. "A year ago," Claire began, "I found a photo in an old box. A photo that shouldn't exist, of a woman I didn't know, with a date that made no sense. That small rectangle of paper destroyed everything I thought I knew about myself." She paused, letting the words resonate. "For weeks, I felt lost, furious, betrayed. My whole life had been built on lies, and I didn't know how to move forward. But then I started looking for answers. And what I found was much more than the truth about my origin. I found my biological mother, Miranda, a brave woman who let me go to give me a better life. I found my Aunt Lucy, the sister of the father I never knew. I found stories of love and sacrifice, of pain and redemption." She looked at Sophie. "And I found something else. I found that family isn't just the blood we share. It's the people who choose to stay when everything falls apart. It's my wife, Sophie, who was by my side at every moment of this journey. It's Marina, who fought for me in the courts. It's all of you, who are here tonight, celebrating not just an exhibition, but the idea that we can reinvent ourselves, that we can find beauty even in the most broken stories." The tears began to fall, but Claire didn't try to stop them. "If there's one thing I want you to take from tonight, it's this. Don't be afraid of the truth. Don't be afraid to discover who you really are. It may hurt. It may destroy what you thought you knew. But on the other side of that pain is something better. There's authenticity. There's freedom. There's the possibility of building a life that's truly your own." She finished her speech with a broken but firm voice. "Thank you all for being here. And thank you, above all, to the women who taught me that love is stronger than any secret. Eleanor, who raised me with devotion. Miranda, who let me go out of love. Sophie, who chose me every day. You are my true origin." Applause filled the gallery. Claire stepped down from the stage and went straight into Sophie's arms, who held her as the emotions overflowed. "You were incredible," Sophie whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." The night continued with music, conversations, and the constant murmur of people admiring the photographs. Claire walked through the exhibition several times, stopping in front of each image, remembering the stories behind them. There was a section dedicated entirely to her case. The original photo of Miranda holding her as a baby, enlarged and framed. Next to it, the photo of the three of them together that Miranda had found. And finally, a new image, taken on her wedding day. Claire and Sophie kissing under the garden lights, with Miranda applauding in the background. 3 generations, 3 forms of love, 1 story. Miranda approached her while she contemplated the images. "I never thought I would live to see this," the older woman said. "My story, our story, exposed for the world, without shame, without hiding." "Times changed," Claire replied. "Not just the times. We changed too." They stood in silence for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the photos. "Claire," Miranda said after a while, "there's something I want to tell you. Something I've been thinking about a lot." "What is it?" "I want to move to New York, to be closer to you, to Sophie, To participate in your lives in a way I never could before. Claire looked at her in surprise. You would leave Taos, your shop. The shop can run without me. I have trusted employees. And Taos. Taos was my refuge for 30 years. But I don't need to hide anymore. I don't need to be far away. Claire felt her heart expand. We would love to have you nearby. Really? Really? There's an apartment available in our building. We could be neighbors. Miranda smiled, a smile that lit up her wrinkled face. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. They hugged again, and this time there were no tears of sadness, only joy, only hope, only the beginning of something new. The exhibition was a success. Newspapers wrote about it, social media filled with comments, and Sophie's book sold out in the first week. But more important than any public recognition was the personal impact. People who had gone through similar experiences began contacting Claire. They wrote her letters, sent emails, looked for her on social media. Everyone had stories to tell. Secret adoptions, divided families, hidden truths that had come to light. And Claire responded to each one, offering words of encouragement, sharing resources, reminding them they weren't alone. You've become a kind of guide, Sophie commented one night, while they reviewed the messages they'd received together. I'm no guide. I'm just someone who went through something hard and survived. That's exactly what a guide is. Claire smiled. I guess you're right. The months passed. Miranda moved to the building in Park Slope, taking an apartment 2 floors below. Family dinners became weekly, with Lucy joining when she could. The apartment that had once been quiet now filled with voices, with laughter, with the warmth of human connection. On the first anniversary of the exhibition, Sophie organized a small gathering at home. Only the closest people: Miranda, Lucy, Marina with her family, a few intimate friends. Claire made her grandmother's pot roast, following the recipe Eleanor had taught her years ago. The aroma filled the apartment, bringing memories of her childhood, of shared kitchens, of afternoons learning the secrets of home cooking. Smells incredible, Miranda said, entering the kitchen. Eleanor was always a good cook. She taught me everything I know. Then she's still here in a way, in every dish you prepare, in every recipe you share. Claire nodded, feeling the truth of those words. I miss her, she admitted. Despite everything she hid from me, I miss her. It's possible to miss someone and be angry with them at the same time. Love isn't simple. No, it's not. Dinner was perfect. Conversations that flowed, laughter that erupted, the clinking of glasses toasting to life, to family, to the future. Claire looked around, absorbing every detail. Sophie telling an anecdote from her last photography trip. Miranda showing Lucy weaving techniques, Marina discussing legal cases with her husband. This was her life now. This was her family, built with effort, with pain, with love. When the guests left and the apartment fell silent, Claire and Sophie sat together on the fire escape, watching the stars over Brooklyn. Are you happy? Sophie asked. More than I ever thought possible. Even after everything that happened? Especially after everything that happened. Because now I know this happiness is real. It's not based on lies or illusions. It's based on truth, however painful it was to discover. Sophie kissed her softly. I love you, Claire Hayes Walsh. I love you, Sophie Mitchell Walsh. They stayed like that, intertwined, while the night advanced and the city lights flickered like promises of tomorrows to come. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. There would be more challenges, more surprises, more moments of pain and joy. But Claire was no longer afraid. She had learned she could face anything, as long as she wasn't alone. And she wasn't alone. She had Sophie, her life partner. She had Miranda, the mother she had recovered. She had Lucy, the family she had discovered. She had a community of people who supported and loved her. She finally had a story that was completely her own. Weeks later, while tidying the apartment, Claire found Maggie's box, now almost empty. She had stored it in a closet after the trial, not quite knowing what to do with it. She opened it one last time. At the bottom, she found something she hadn't seen before. A small note, folded and yellowed, written in Maggie's trembling handwriting. "Dear Claire, if you found everything I left for you, then my work is done. I was the keeper of secrets for too long. Now those secrets are yours, to do with them what you will. I only ask one thing. Don't hate anyone for what you discovered. Eleanor loved you with all her heart. Miranda let you go out of love. Even my Uncle Arthur, in his twisted way, believed he was protecting the family. Love takes strange forms sometimes, forms we don't understand, that hurt us, that confuse us, but it's still love. I hope you find peace. I hope you find happiness. And I hope that when you think of all of us, you remember we did the best we could with what we had. With eternal affection, your Aunt Maggie P.S. The photo that fell from the book wasn't an accident. I put it there knowing you would find it someday. It was time for the truth to come to light. Forgive me for not having the courage to tell you in person." Claire held the note against her chest, feeling a mixture of gratitude and sadness. Maggie, the quiet aunt she had barely known, had been the architect of her transformation. She had planted the seed that eventually bloomed into the life she now had. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty air. "Thank you for giving me the truth." She stored the note along with the photos and important documents in a new box she had bought to preserve her history. Someday, perhaps, she would share all of this with someone else. With adopted children, maybe, or with nieces and nephews, or simply with anyone who needed to know that families come in all shapes and sizes. But for now, it was enough to know that the story existed, that it was real, that it was hers. Sophie entered the room and found her sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers and memories. "What are you doing?" "Organizing the past," Claire replied, "so I can move forward to the future." Sophie sat beside her, taking her hand. "And what does that future look like?" Claire smiled. "It looks bright. Complicated, probably. Full of surprises, surely. But bright. I like how that sounds." "Me too." They kissed among the papers and photographs, among the fragments of the past and the promises of tomorrow. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the Brooklyn sky with golden and pink tones, announcing another sunset, another ending, another beginning. The photo that had fallen from the book was no longer a threat. It was a reminder of where Claire came from, of everything she had overcome, of the people who had loved her in their imperfect way. And as the daylight faded and the first stars began to appear, Claire knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened, she would be okay. Because she was no longer the woman who discovered a lie. She was the woman who found her truth. And that truth, finally, had set her free. If you want the continuation of this story, write it in the comments, because that's the only way I'll know you want it. And don't forget that YouTube only prioritizes subscribers. So subscribe now so you don't miss the next story that will make you believe in love, in second chances, and that it's never too late to find your true family. This is just the beginning of a journey that can continue. See you soon.